we are basing this workshop on a book by Daniel Hunter called Building the Movement to End the New Jim Crow. So if people read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, how many people read it? Yeah. And if you read it, especially if you read it in a study group, it's a really good follow-up, how-to kind of book. And how to do movement building that's led by the people directly affected by the issues that we're focusing on. And this has become a really important, and I think, game changer in movement building work. And so we're going to try to model some of that and talk about different ways of doing it. But as somebody who's worked on these issues since the 1970s, in which time things have just gotten worse and worse and worse, and that there's a kind of six-fold increase in the number of people incarcerated since I started to do my work. In California, we were at about 27,000 in the state prison system in the early 70s with Ronald Reagan as governor. And now we're at 140,000. And so this huge building boom has cropped up everywhere. But what I want to say is that there's a tipping point happening now. And suddenly, people are saying mass incarceration on a fairly regular basis and really, I think, believing that this is not working for us and that we have to find another way. And we, of course, consider that we've all been part of that shift, but it's been a building effect. And I give Michelle a lot of credit for getting that ball rolling, although AFSC's own book, Beyond Prisons, which is available back there, it's 11 years old now, but unfortunately not very out of date. The statistics are approximately the same, except for some issues like solitary confinement, which we will talk about a little bit. But one of the biggest lessons, I would say, as this tipping point is happening, has been how to incorporate and follow the lead of formerly incarcerated people, family members, and survivors of violent crime.
And currently incarcerated people.
And currently incarcerated people. So, so that's what we really want to zero in on today. So let's introduce the facilitators. I'm Laura Magnani. I do healing justice work in the San Francisco office of the AFSC, and before that, sometime before that, I worked also for the Friends Committee on Legislation in California, doing criminal justice work, among other things. And I did write that book back there, Beyond Prisons, and don't know what else to say. I've been doing it a while, This is not Teresa Schultz. I don't know if you can figure that out, but Teresa had a last-minute conflict that we didn't want to mess with, and fortunately, Josh Glenn stepped up and is joining us, and so you can
So hi, my name is Josh. I work for a youth-led organization called the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project. We're a youth-led organization that goes into the Philadelphia adult jails, and we do art and poetry workshops every weekend with the young men and women that are locked up in charge of adults. We also have a campaign to repeal Act 33. That's the law that allows youth to be automatically charged as adults and held in adult prisons pre-trial. So we're trying to basically get young people out of adult jails, and we would think that they should be treated in juvenile facilities. We treat it as children because they are children. I'm also a member of the No 215 Jail Coalition, and we're working on ending cash bail in Philadelphia. And I'll speak a little bit in detail about that a little bit more. But one thing I can say about the success that we've had with the No 215 Jail Coalition is that we got ACLU to employ 50 people to do canvassing for the DA race that's happening in Philadelphia May 16th. So that's one thing. Also, yeah, I mean, I'm also a member of the Incarceration PA, and I was around doing that work at the earlier stages of when the organization started. And then we kind of split it into two different groups, one for CABI and one for the No 215 Jail Coalition, so we're all connected.
And I'm Layne. I'm on staff at AFSC as a public relations associate, but in my time outside of work for many years, I've been involved in anti-prison movements here in Pennsylvania. And so I'm sort of here today at this conference as part of AFSC, but here in this workshop facilitating as a member of Decarcerated PA. which Josh just mentioned. Decarcerated PA is a grassroots campaign that's working to end mass incarceration in Pennsylvania. And we try and do that. We have a three-pronged approach to that. So the first sort of pillar of our platform is no new prisons. And that's work to stop the construction of new prisons and jails and detention centers, and ideally to start closing the ones that we have. We believe that every time, I mean, we know, as Laura was referring to earlier, across the country, every time they build a new jail or a prison, they don't just fill it, they overfill it. And so we see actually eliminating that infrastructure of incarceration as a critical step to reducing and ultimately ending it. But of course that can't be the only thing, right? So their second point is decarceration. And decarceration is sort of what it sounds like, right? It's the idea of stopping and eliminating the policies and practices that send people to prison, that hold people in prison for long periods of time, and that send people back to prison after they've been released. And the third point of that, our platform, is community reinvestment. So we know now from decades into this dramatic increase in the prison system that prisons and mass incarceration and these punitive policies don't make our communities safer. And in fact, they make them less safe because they're destabilizing, they separate families, you know, I think it's sort of intuitive that putting someone in a cage for many years is not a healing practice, right? So the third, but we know that there are things that make our communities safer, and that's access to quality public education, health care, jobs and job training, community-based mental health and drug and alcohol treatment, and a healthy environment, right? The list sort of goes on and on about things that we know intuitively and we know through research are stabilizing forces that build strong communities. And in addition to that, looking at sort of transformative or non-punitive programs that actually address the root causes of harm and violence rather than making them worse.
Yeah, and I probably should have said more about what the AFSC does in California at least, but it repeats itself around the country, which is that we are working on mass incarceration, always in a coalition context. So the coalition that we work with is statewide, which is a new thing. We used to have a lot of difficulty getting the North in California to be working with the South, but with technology that's not a problem anymore, and we can have conference calls all over the place and keep in touch and work on things statewide. And we do exactly the same thing that Layne was describing. We work on sentencing reform. We work on ways of shrinking the prison population that will be sustainable rather than people just getting out for a minute and then getting right back. And we're working on bail reform to also shrink those populations and at the legislative and at the street level and so forth. We've worked a lot on solitary confinement in the last few years. We've always worked on it. AFSC has, but when the prisoners went on hunger strike in 2011 in our state, who were in solitary confinement, it was a game changer. And since we're supposed to talk about a success story, we have reduced the solitary confinement population in California from about 3,000 in security housing units to about 500 now.
That's good.
And the ADSEG, that is administrative segregation numbers, have come down similarly dramatically. That doesn't mean releasing people other than to release them to general population, but that's a huge change for them. And in many cases, these are people who've been in solitary for decades. We had over 500 people in solitary for over 10 years.
Can I ask a question? The people that went on the hunger strike, did you know in advance they were going to do that, or could they have done it in isolation and it not become public?
Yes, well, this is part of letting the people inside lead the movement. So they made the decision, don't ask me how, maybe you can explain it. These people are in separate cells, but somehow they got together by talking across the pod through their little tiny doorway spaces, meal slots, and came up with a nonviolent tactic. They came up with the demands that they wanted to work for, and they sent a package of information out to groups like ours around the state saying, we will not be successful if you don't work on the outside. And they also asked for a mediation team to be formed that would provide communication back and forth between themselves and state officials. So what we did was we did come together as a coalition. We looked around and we picked people for the mediation team, and we sent those names in to the men for approval. I was on that list and still am. This is now 2017, still working, even though the hunger strikes themselves have stopped for the time being. So yes, they decided that that was what needed to happen. They had been on hunger strike in the past, and had it not be effective, they felt because people on the outside weren't aware of it. Yeah.
Oh, and I actually also forgot to mention a success, even though I was the one who said we should each do that. So Josh mentioned that Decarcerate PA is part of two major campaigns right now. One that started as a campaign to stop the expansion of the Philadelphia jails. We actually won that campaign. A new jail is not being built in Philadelphia. So that campaign transformed into a campaign to end cash bail, which Josh is going to talk about a bunch in a second. And the other campaign is a campaign to end life without parole in Pennsylvania, which we call death by incarceration, because it's a sentence to die in prison. I'm part of a coalition that's working to end life without parole. And for the first time, after years and years of people fighting on this issue, we finally do have at least a bill in the state legislature that would do just that. So we're going to move in a little bit to our first exercise. One of the things we wanted to do was kind of just make sure that we had some shared understanding of what mass incarceration is and how it works. So we hear a lot and think a lot, or at least we do, and I imagine you do too because you're here in this workshop, about mass incarceration. It's sort of this big overarching term. But actually this big picture of mass incarceration is propped up by a bunch of the different things that we've named and haven't yet named, right? So the actual policies, the conditions, access to resources, et cetera. We sort of have been referring to these as the pillars that uphold mass incarceration, so you can imagine it's sort of not stable on its own, right? It needs all of these things that are happening in the laws and in the streets to uphold it. So what we kind of wanted to do...
Just to say that this is an inverted triangle, since we have, not everybody has sight in the room. So it's a triangle with the point at the bottom. And we're going to talk about what props this structure up.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to call on you to sort of what you think of when you think of what are the pillars of mass incarceration. What do you think is holding up the system? Fear. I'm sorry?
Fear.
Oh, fear.
Bad arrest.
Bad arrest?
Money.
Profit.
Racism.
Yeah.
A little slower.
And actually, I'm going to put racism. When we did this before, we actually ended up putting racism at the bottom as sort of like a structure that actually feeds into all of these sort of individual policies. We see racism as sort of underlying them.
We actually had racism on there 3 times.
Yeah.
We put racism on this side, racism on that side, and then we put it.
Maybe we'll throw another one.
Inadequate legal defense.
Which goes with poverty. Unemployment.
Vindictiveness.
Parole boards.
Parole boards, yes, that's a great one.
Lack of programs, that's one of the things that keeps our incarceration up. People can't get out on parole because the penitentiary doesn't provide programs.
Mental illness.
Yeah.
Mandatory sentencing.
Lack of access to lack of access to housing and employment when they get out, so that it makes it harder to stay out.
But no good re-entry support.
Inadequate education, poor education.
Agreed.
I'm going to put bail up there since we referenced it earlier. All right, I have room for another pillar too if anyone has any.
I don't know how to say this, but I've heard that building prisons is one of the most profitable housing things in the country.
That's why I said agreed. Profits in there.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of housing
Yeah.
being profitable is
And I think that the specific point about building prisons is that now, you know, in a lot of rural areas, they used to be farming communities. As economic policies have made farming in the U.S. no longer profitable, the prison boom was actually sold to rural, mostly white communities as job creators, job opportunities. And so I think that that specific piece is super important for understanding why we see, I mean, in Pennsylvania in particular, like mid-state legislators again and again advocating for tough on crime policies that we absolutely know do not work. Okay, I have room for one more pillar if anyone has anything they haven't gotten.
You know, I think what you just said, that there's policies that we know don't work. So if we can come up with a couple of words to reflect that, I think it's lack of evidence-based policing.
Yeah, police. Yeah.
Well,
I think they have a culture of targeting certain neighborhoods and, you know, perpetuating the same
they
injustice.
go after the easy arrests, and the easy arrests are poor minority population.
Also, they like over police those communities too. So like, you know, I've seen the difference where I was in a rural area and I like had no contact with police ever. They never messed with me, had no problems. I go in my neighborhood, I'll get stopped 10 times in like the same day. So it's very different. And I think that's it too, separating people by race and class and gender and everything.
Seems like it's sort of social control.
Hypersensitivity.
Yeah, social control.
Yeah. I'm just going to put social control as one of the underlying factors here.
Divide and conquer. So they find ways to divide the community, and then, you know, then they conquer.
Yeah.
I think of like economic segregation.
It's just segregation.
Yeah, right. But financially, it's like a status, class status or whatever. They use that as a way to.
All right. We are officially out of space for additional pillars. So there's good news and bad news. The bad news, of course, is that there are a lot of things propping up the system. But the good news, if we use that term loosely, is that it means there are lots of opportunities and lots of fronts on which this system can be challenged, and that we know that wearing away at any of these pillars makes this whole pyramid of mass incarceration less stable, less able to function, and can diminish and weaken that system. And that's especially true to the extent that we can be working across these issues with and working on different issues, but with a common goal and vision in mind, and that's to topple this triangle over. And just to go a little bit more in depth on one of them, we were going to ask Josh to talk a little bit more specifically about the bail campaign, and bail as a pillar that's very related to poverty, it upholds mass incarceration, and sort of what work to challenge that looks like.
Yeah, and it also has a lot to do with my story. I was locked up at the age of 16, charged as an adult, and I sat in jail for 18 months, and then my case is dismissed. That's not the worst part about it. The worst part about it is I went to court that day, and my attorney said, "You're going to lose the case. It's bad. You should take this deal. We're going to give you time served. We'll give you 5 years probation. You can get out today." That's what kind of inspired me to be an organizer, because of that injustice right there. I didn't take the deal, though, even though most people would have, you know. And I didn't take the deal because around that time, I think I was a little bit more involved in YASP, and that was before we created it. We recreated it, and we changed it into an organization that trains you to be organizers, but also we employ them to be organizers, and we let them take the lead on just fighting injustice. But mainly we're focused on Act 33, which is the law that allowed them to be charged as adults. So, you know, I didn't take the deal, I got out, and then then the rest of the issues came. So then I found out that I can't get a job because even though I didn't get convicted of the crime, it still comes up when I file for a job. So that was another barrier I had to deal with. Then school, they would let me get my high school diploma. They transferred me over to the adult side. Before I got my high school diploma, I only need a few credits. So that was another thing that held me back. And it just like, I mean, I caught up, but it was just like, think about all of those barriers along with you're going right back to the same poor community that you were in the first place. But also, my bail was only $2,000. That's the 10%. So my bail was $20,000, 10%, $2,000. And of course, I was in a poor family. My family could not pay the bail. Didn't even expect them to. But the thing is, I mean, I think you would think after a year, you could figure somebody don't got what they need to let me out or something, or make some type of adjustment. I stayed there for 18 months until they eventually dismissed the case. But then that goes to relate to bail. Bail is being used as a tool to hold people in jail for a long period of time and to get them to take plea deals. 90% of the cases in Philadelphia end in plea deals. They get mostly everybody to play. And so that's one reason why we wanted to end cash bail, but also think about how it impacts the community. So we're already in poor communities. You have dad, maybe he is selling drugs, or maybe he is doing something wrong because that's all he knows or whatever. So he get locked up. Now the family is without dad. Dad was the sole provider. Now you got mom homeless, kids homeless. Now they're out in the street. And then that's happening triple times in our communities with everybody, but not to mention their whole family's poor. So, but also they use bail as a tool to, when they know poor people don't have the bail. I mean, that's just what I'm saying. So they know that you're not supposed to use bail just to hold somebody in jail. That's illegal, but they still do it. So that's why we, as the New 215 Jail Coalition, we thought about going on to like ending cash bail. Also, we've met with some people in DC. They ended cash bail in 1992. Their prison is at 50% capacity. Most people come to court. They let most people out, even with violent crimes, because you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And they really kind of operate with that motto down there. So we met with our city council members. We actually took a bus ride up there with our city council members, and we met with some of the head people in DC. And they told us all the reasons why we should end cash bail. And we just been working off that momentum to like try to, you know, pound it in our city council head, the DA candidates head. We just did a forum April 18th where we invited all the DA candidates into our street Methodist church. And we basically got them to commit to ending cash bail, charging youth as adults, and sentencing people to life without parole. But I mean, they are in the campaign, so I don't necessarily believe them, but everybody said, most of them said they would stop those practices.
Can you tell me, ending cash bail means exactly, so we have bail in our community, and you can, like 10%, you can have cash and get out. That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
You want to have them be able to get out on their own recognizance.
Right. And I mean, and it doesn't destroy families, people not losing their job, but also people are still proven innocent, proven guilty. But also, I mean, most of the states that ended cash bail said that it works great. You know, like people usually come to court. All of the public safety fears that the media try to talk about, it doesn't happen. You know, most people go to jail.
My house was broken into in January 5th. Not that I know what day it was, but it was January 5th. I don't mind. I mean, you know, it was January 5th. And the person who did it was a sister and her two sisters and a guy. One sister got out of jail. The other two had cased our neighborhood. And the three of them drove into our neighborhood and walked to all three doors because we could see footsteps. And they went to the third door, got in the house, and even lifted the lid to use the toilet. I mean, they were really, you know, but this woman of the three was out on, had the highest bail, but literally got out on bail, came and did a burglary, got enough money to buy some more meth, which is really the primary purpose. And then, you know, so it is, in our community, it's going to be hard to sell this, because even though I would be comfortable with it, I don't think, because this woman has been arrested 13 times. It was on the front page of the paper, and her picture was this big about how she had been arrested so many times and keeps coming right back and getting arrested over and over and over. So I don't know how to address that.
I think one thing to give you this, probably going to, but like I think one thing about bail in particular is people are like, oh, what's the alternative? Of course, what bail does is just creates two separate systems for people who have money and people who don't. So, I mean, in this scenario, the judges would still have the option to not grant bail, to not, or the equivalent of not setting bail, like to not offer someone coming out on their own recognizance, right? But we know, like, bail is purely financial. You either have the money or you don't have the money. And I think we all know that our prisons are full of people who don't have the money, and in fact, 80% of the people in the Philly jails are there pre-trial. So they're sitting up on State Road for something that they maybe did or didn't do.
You got to take in that statistic, 80%.
I know, that's what, I just wonder, how do we know that answer in my town? How do I find that answer?
I mean, I think that you shift the narrative from like the answer being put you in a cage so you stop committing crimes. Like that doesn't do it. I think the answer is starting a conversation around restorative justice, and so that you end the fear of.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, like you end the fear of just because they're not in a cage means they're going to do something. You say, oh, we're like working to restore something more holistically.
Right, yeah, we have to make people whole. You take a man's life or a woman's life away for 10 years, you let them back out in a worse situation than they were in. I mean, yeah, they will keep committing crime. We have to address the root causes to why people are committing crime in the first place. And it's usually because of poverty, it's usually because of drugs. So how do we create a system that helps them with those problems so that they can be made whole? And like, yeah, it's about making the victim whole too, but it's also about making everybody whole. How can we stop this guy from breaking into people's houses? How can we stop these people from selling drugs? Get them a job. How do we build systems where it's connected? So, okay, we do the time, we make sure that it's something in place so that these people can have proper things they need when they get out so they won't commit crime.
The resistance to pretrial release programs is from business people, bail bonds people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we've had pretrial release in South Florida for a long time, and that's where most of the resistance comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But the selling point is because of overcrowded jails. That's how you release, you release people so that the jails aren't overcrowded.
Mm-hmm.
Is the concept of reformatory just completely in some other universe these days?
Yes.
Well, especially not.
Also, we always relate back to, okay, if somebody's rich, they can pay to get out every time with bail if we use a cash bail system. So we have a poor person, and a lot of people are in there for bails that's like $500. It's really bad. But also other people are in for a number of different reasons. But most of the time, they know that the people that they're giving these bails to can't pay it. So you have people sitting in jail, but then also they get to the point where they're desperate enough to take a deal. And most people are taking the deal because if they don't have bail money, of course they don't have lawyer money. So you like these people are being injustice in more than one way. And so
the other thing that people need to know is that 90% statistic that you quoted about taking a plea bargain is scandalous enough. The other part of it is that if you don't take that deal, you're risking a longer sentence and a much harsher treatment, which is wrong, right? I mean, the point of having trial by jury is that that's what we think justice is about. And to just assume that, oh, well, it's inconvenient to take people all the way through the process the way they're entitled to be. So one pillar that could really, diminish the plea bargain system would be to eliminate the pressure on people to take a plea bargain and really give them access to the justice system properly.
Also, we can free some beds up where people aren't sitting in jail for long periods of time, then maybe we can use the other funds to boost up pretrial services where they have those type of programs that address these problems. But we're spending so much money on just housing people and not helping people that we're turning communities down.
In the 1980s, we had pretrial. I practiced criminal defense law for a short period of time in the 1980s, and at that time we had a pretrial release program that worked very good. If you had a place in the community, a job, etc., then you were released on your own recognizance. There was a tough on crime and a change from political term, from Democrats to Republican judges, and Republican judges almost immediately did away with this. And they started putting the bail system in. We now have a major lawsuit going on in Houston about this surprisingly enough, the county and the Democratic judges that have been elected are all pushing very much to settle this and to get the pretrial release system back like it was, because when they did away with it, they built a new jail that would house about 1,800 people. They now have about 2,000 people in the jail, and most of them are, again, about 80% of them are awaiting trial. So they suddenly found out that spending $50 a day on these people for 6 and 8 and 10 months is not economic, and so they're going back. Actually, the county commissioner's court is actually going back to supporting the pretrial release. The big fight against it right now is the bail bonds. They because it's for the people that are out on bail, it's big money for them. And, so, but it's changing. We're going to have a good pretrial release system getting used.
So I also wanted to give people time to just like talk about examples in the work y'all do that could probably knock down some of these pillars. So the validating is just a lead thing because I'm doing the val campaign, but you know, we will give y'all the floor so y'all can.
And either things that you are working on that would knock down these pillars, or even if you're maybe not doing this work now, but you're sitting here thinking like, oh yeah, we could do that. Or
I worked for Miami-Dade County for 30 years, and 13 of those years were civilian oversight of law enforcement. And I'm the one that put up bad arrests, because there's part of our jails are if you ask a correction professional if all the people in there were arrested properly, most of them would say maybe a third of them were good arrests. So I think the front end of the system is a place where I think we need to pay some attention to. I know we're heavy into talking about prisons right now, but I don't think we should forget the front end of the system. That engagement between the citizen and the cop is something. In Dade County, the statistics are worse. It's 95% pre-bargain, not 90%. And you won't find anybody that's going to support people going through trial, because then you're talking about big bucks and many more judges, many more public defenders, many more state's attorneys would be required if everybody stood for their rights and to demand trial by jury or whatever. But I just don't think we should forget the first engagement between the system and the citizen is between cop and person.
It's very messed up. I'm sorry, but like in my community, like we had no relationship with the police. They just come to lock people up. They don't introduce themselves. They don't know our families. They don't, like, how do you protect our community when we don't know you? We never met you. The only time we met you is when you harass us 20, 30 times a day. And I'm talking about I was literally harassed 20 to 30 times a day. I would walk around the corner and a cop would pull around and stop me again. And I would go somewhere else and they would stop me again. And then another cop would stop me. And then they know me from my neighborhood. So they would literally harass me every single day. And then I built kind of a distrust for them. I don't like police. Even when I see police to this day, I'm not doing anything wrong, but I still just feel like, yo, I'm telling you, I've seen people go to jail for something they didn't do at all. And like, we're just sitting there, they say, yeah, he fits the description. They've shined a light on me. And like, they grabbed me from the store, I was walking with a friend, they said, oh, he got the same color one. They brought some people around, they flashed a light in my face, said, there's something, they said, no, they let me go. But the thing is, I could have lost, that could have been me in jail that 1 second, that one situation. And it happens every day. But also, we, as a community, we all have to be in the community. So, yeah, y'all come to protect our community. Why don't I know you? Why don't you introduce yourself? Why don't you get to know our communities? Why don't we build a trust for each other? That's something that has to happen.
I feel like the movement for Black Lives is doing a lot of great cross-issue work in that sense of like saying, yeah, we understand living in this policed community, and it's similar to what Palestinians face. And what I was just thinking about is, and maybe others are working on this, but one way to break down some of these pillars is, I think for some of us in a more privileged position, the era we're in now with Trump and all this like post-truth and blah, 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 it's like, oh my gosh, we're so outraged about that. Like, this is horrible. How can you like deny facts? How can you like not go with what's logical? But exactly what I hear you saying, that's exactly what people face all the time in certain communities around this, like with the plea deal. It's like, I don't care whether you did it or you didn't do it. We don't have time for that. Let's just like move it along. And I remember when I did criminal justice work with AFSC, the people who would call me and would be totally outraged were like, you know, white middle class parents whose kids found themselves in prison, and they're like, this system is so unfair. Somebody needs to do something about this. And it's like, yeah. You know, so I feel like what we need to do to break the system down is find ways to like build these coalitions, not only within this issue, but across this issue to all these other people who are outraged about all this other crap that's going on that, you know what I'm saying? Like to say, yeah, this is exactly what we've been experiencing all along.
Also, education ties into it too. So you underfund our education, you overcrowd the classrooms. Teacher can't possibly teach 30 kids in 45 minutes. Nowhere in America or anywhere properly. So you have kids going to school with all other problems from home. You have them in a negative community. Then they go to school and they get nothing out of there. Then they go back on the corner. People start to act like they're their friends and they're trying to, you know, to find ways to use them. Then they start to use the young people, start to turn them negative, and then you have negative young people. Now think about that young person. His life could have changed. His life could have been that way or that way. Let's say he had a mentor in school. Let's say he had somebody that worked with him, help him fill out his work papers. Let's say he had somebody that put him on a basketball team. That's the only difference between a bad kid and a good kid. And we got to just make sure those resources come back to our communities.
Yes. We have a neighborhood association. I want to tear down one little point.
Okay, good.
I don't know where it's at, but we have a neighborhood association. We have a block party. We always invite the police, and we tell them they can't wear their uniform, and they don't. And when we have 6 free swim days that the neighborhood association has sponsored, the city finally agreed we could do this, and we're feeding them good food. I mean, you know, popcorn instead of potato chips. It's healthy things, bananas, a 5-gallon container of water, and we had 750 people show up our first free swim day last summer. We've had 2 this summer, but we also have them play chess, and what we want to do is get the police out there playing chess with the kids. And so the police know they need to do this. So we have a neighborhood on the 4th of July that's had 70 or 80 people blowing fireworks, and this year the police are organizing with our neighborhood association to do a block party from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. In the morning, they're going to have 3-on-3 basketball that's being coordinated by the newspaper. At 4 o'clock, we're doing a free barbecue, and the churches on the block are doing the barbecue. And at 6 o'clock, 6 or 7, they're going to start loading buses to go out to where the fireworks are in the town, and then public city buses, and they're going to bring them back to the neighborhood. And the police are part of the thing. They're the ones that organize this, because they're in a situation where they have 40 or 50 kids blowing off fireworks at a gas station on 4th of July. They're scared. They won't even go into the situation because they think they're going to get injured, and they could. It's a gas station.
Yeah, so I think that this is a great list, and we've seen sort of touched on some of the ways we can start chipping away at these pillars and sort of topple this triangle. So those are like great campaigns and great examples people have shared. And now we're going to switch into a little bit talking about, okay, we know what we want to work on, but what is it actually like to work together, to work in coalitions? How can we do that effectively? So I don't know, do you want to explain?
So the idea is that we all have done group work of one kind or another, and we all play different roles in these coalitions. And so we're going to spend a little time figuring out who am I in these group settings, and what kind of action you're most comfortable taking. And then we're going to start comparing those actions across the room. You know, we're going to go into different corners of the room depending on which action you choose. So I'm going to first tell you the scenario and then tell you the choices you have for how you might want to impact this issue. So the scenario is the prisoners have decided to go on hunger strike to protest the conditions of confinement, and they have reached out to the community and want us to support them in this action. And I just have to pause and say the idea that these people who are labeled the worst of the worst have chosen a nonviolent tactic with the kind of history that hunger strikes have to you know, show what they're about. And I guess I should add to that in California, people are put in solitary confinement in these security housing units because of their so-called gang affiliation. The theory is that they'll fight each other if given a chance, so we're going to keep them separate. And so they made a very intentional decision to work across all of the so-called gang groups. And I say so-called because it's the department that's deciding what group you're in. And you know they're deciding it based on how you look. Yep. And so they are overriding that designation and saying we're going to all work together. And part of the instruction in this packet that they sent out was, if you write to us, write to all of us. Don't just pick somebody and relate to that person the whole time, because we need to be making these decisions together. So those kinds of things are historic, you know, and it's totally become a game changer. So they've decided to go on hunger strike. We're supporting them from the outside. What role do you think you're going to play? I think you're supposed to do the role.
Oh, yeah. So we're going to be breaking you into 3 groups based on, you can sort of self-choose which role speaks the most to you. We know that everyone is complex and contains multitudes and often plays many roles, but for the purposes of this, you're just going to choose one role. And you're going to come together in your small group to kind of think like, okay, what's our small group going to do to lift up the voices, get the word out about this strike? What are we going to do? What's our plan of action? So the roles are, and we've just sort of given these names, the helpers. That's people who are sort of first concerned about how the group is doing, how people are doing, how people are being affected. People who, for their first question is, are people doing okay? So that's
the people on hunger strike,
yeah,
who haven't been eating for 2 weeks, 3 weeks,
yeah.
4 weeks.
These are often people who do a lot of work doing direct support, right? And then group 2 is going to be the advocates. That's people who tend to do more of the policy work, people who want to go to the legislature and change policies that are allowing injustices to occur. So maybe one of the first thoughts that people in that group have is, how can we influence decision makers? And then we have the action takers, which is people who say, first thought is sort of like, how do we take action to stop this? People who are maybe more inclined towards creative direct action, protest, etc. And we actually had a 4th group that I'll name, although I think we're not going to do a 4th group just based on the number of people who are here, which is the messengers. And that's sort of people's first thought is, how do we get the word out about this? But I think that's probably something that you'll all be thinking about in your individual groups. So we're going to break you up into groups and then give you just a short period of time to discuss amongst yourselves what is it you're going to do to support this hunger strike. What's your
for your group? What's your action plan for your group? And make sure that y'all keep in mind that lifting up the voices of people inside and following their leadership is crucial to, it should be like the whole goal around your plan. So you got to make sure that the people inside, you know, you keep them in mind when you're thinking about the plan, and like make sure that it's something that you may think they will want to be a part of.
And so we're going to give each of you a big piece of paper and a marker, and you're going to jot down some ideas in your individual groups, and then we'll come back together and share them. I think we're going to have people who identify, at least even just for today, with the helper group. Maybe we'll do over here to the left-hand side, or to my left, I guess to everyone else's right. So do helpers, and then maybe we'll have advocates sort of in this middle space right here, straight ahead, and we'll have the action taker, rabble-rouser group to my right over here. You're going to be a representative.
Try to bring in outside medical support if that seems to be needed, and perhaps provide funds for that if necessary. Laura pointed out that when people stop eating, they don't like the taste of water, and they get dehydrated. That's pretty serious. So we might offer them, get the prison to offer flavored liquids so they will not get dehydrated. Be responsive to the prisoner demands, knowing what it is they're looking to accomplish, and amplify their voices as possible. Investigate international standards for prison conditions. Make sure they're being followed in the prison. Contact a chaplain or outside religious leaders to help with spiritual needs of the prisoners in this situation.
Thank you very much. was very helpful from the helpers. Next, we're going to bring up the advocates.
You can take ours down. Or not.
Okay. I think the first thing that we all agreed upon was that we need to know what it is that the prisoners on the hunger strike are demanding. What are their demands? How are we going to do that? I'm not sure what the best way is. We might have to work through the families. Certainly we mentioned that on the previous one. We may have to work through attorneys because they have privileged access to the prisoners. I'm not going to rely on the prison authorities because they may not be the most reliable source of information there, but I think that's our first requirement. We mentioned engaging the media, but I'm not sure that is the second thing that we want to do. I think that comes later, but certainly these other steps are working in that direction. So we want to talk to members of the families and other loved ones who are, in a position to tell us more about the individuals so that they are not just nameless individuals or mugshots that the police may furnish. Talk with prisoners, especially prisoners who have been in solitary confinement within that same institution to get some insight as to how the conditions that have led to this hunger strike. We need to educate ourselves, certainly, about the extent to which solitary confinement is used within this particular institution. What are the policies that are in place? We need to learn about other places that have other options to solitary confinement or use it far less frequently. I'm assuming that will be one of the demands. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. But extremely important is that when we are communicating with the media and the public in other ways, that we don't just talk about a nameless mass of individuals, but we can bring forth individual stories of people, that we can humanize the people who are staging the hunger strike. And then the attorneys come in at various places. Certainly they may be a conduit for some negotiations with the authorities, but then certainly ongoing engagement, not only with the media, but let's put in there other public sources as well. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good advocacy from the advocates group. Now let's hear some action from the action group.
We didn't actually choose somebody to report back.
Yeah, you can believe.
Ralph, you gotta do it. Josh has already been up here for
Right. So action takers, that was myself, Josh, Richard, and PYM. Gage. Thank you. I remember the organization, I can't remember the name, sorry. So we had a few things for action, we had a lot of things. So going on a hunger strike in solidarity with the folks inside going on a hunger strike, going out and doing rallies, so making the public aware of the issues inside the prison. One thing that was actually brought up though was dealing with the physical consequences of hunger strike. it's a little bit easier for us to vet as opposed to the folks inside. So, you know, there was a question about that kind of solidarity. BBQ for justice. Grilling in front of the City Hall or Criminal Justice Center, and inviting different people from different communities to come out and engage with one another and learn about what it's like being in prison and what some of the issues are. And so trying to build recognition of the issue, not just...
What's BBQ again?
Barbecue.
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 Yeah.
Well, you know, irony is not lost on me. It's more of a solidarity thing, like getting more people involved than
But also, I think you also said just like it's a way of demonstrating what a society should look like outside of the criminal justice system. So we're all together. We're like solidarity. We're here and like we're showing them what we should look like, or what our community should look like.
Thank you. You rest me. So also just IDing the decision makers, right? So it's not enough to just do rallies and have BBQs, but actually who are the people that are making these policies, that are making these conditions possible inside the prisons, and so making sure we identify those people so that when we are doing actions, we're targeting those people as well. Letters and calls, again, to the issues, about the issue to legislators, right? So making them aware that you are a voter and you live in their district and that you don't like these policies, very important. Canvassing, informing people, right? So you canvass, go door to door, you inform people about these issues. Maybe someone learns something new, you invite them to an event, and you build that coalition organically through that grassroots work. Bird dogging, right? So there's elections happening in your area, finding out who the candidates are. So the example that was brought up was the DA race here in Philly, and Josh was just bringing up just the examples of, you know, going to where these policymakers are and making these issues, making them answer questions about these issues. What are their positions on these policies? And you do that in front of cameras, in front of reporters, and they're forced to actually answer these questions. Or at least you're forcing the reporters to think more critically about the questions they're asking candidates. Getting the people who provide, So getting the people who provide research to lawmakers, getting them aware of the issues, making sure that they're actually providing them resources and information that can help change the policy that you're trying to and then pointing out the shame in supporting certain policies that affect these people, right? So Josh, you brought the example of...
Yeah, I'll talk about, so we did an event in front of Seth Williams' office. He was he's still the head DA. He's about to transition out because he got brought up on corruption charges. So, but before he was out of office, before all of this happened, we did a protest with some of the mothers of the people that were locked up in charges. I'm sure they're locked up and sentenced to life without parole under 18. In Pennsylvania, they made a ruling that it was unconstitutional to sentence juveniles to life without parole, so they had to resentence all of the juvenile lifers that they had. We have like almost the most in the world. So, but Seth Williams' office was in charge of really resentencing people, and they're taking their time with it, even though most of these people have been locked up for 30, 40 years, 20 years. So we wanted to do an event to just show them. Well, we did an event where we created a big heart. It was like a big prop that we created, and we just sat outside his office and have a heart. And then, you know, we had people from the community come out. We have some of the mothers of the people that were sentenced to life without parole come out, and, you know, we just shamed them.
I think that was it. And then seeing the community come out, I don't know why I wrote that. That was when Layne told me it was time to go. So that thought was unfinished.
Thanks for reporting.
Great, thank you. Absolutely great. So we were originally going to do a little bit of more, we're running a little behind schedule, so we're going to have a little more time for some deeper reflection about this. But given that we have only 5 minutes left, if people have just to hear from a couple people what your reflections of this exercise was, what your takeaway was, looking at the different pieces together. Did they feel compatible? Did they feel in conflict? Any sort of final thoughts you want to share before we close out? Go ahead.
I wanted to say something about how what this made me realize is how difficult it is with the added layer of the prison system to make sure that this movement is led by the prisoners. And because some things came up in our group, sort of like, well, we need to read the demands and make sure we agree with them. And my position was, no, it wasn't really our job to agree or disagree. It was our job to voice those demands, and we could say we're not, you know, necessarily, we're just, you know, putting these out for the prisoners. But on the other hand, it's like we may have information that would be helpful to them in shaping. So how do you have an authentic dialogue, but also still let the prisoners take the lead? It just made me realize how difficult that can be.
Listening to all these lists reminded me that the group should be communicating with one another.
Right. Yes, definitely. Some of these roles are already done.
Yeah.
It's just that we have to connect with the people that handle that.
And I have to tell you that the coalition that we do have on this issue has been meeting every Monday night since 2011. It doesn't matter if it's Labor Day. It doesn't matter, because all holidays fall on Mondays. Every time we bring it up, well, next week is Labor Day. Maybe we can take a break. No, no, no. We have to meet.
Face-to-face or telephone?
Well, there's a group that meets in Oakland face-to-face, and the rest are on the phone. But usually it averages a dozen people or more each Monday night. It's pretty amazing. And the backbone of that group are the family members, the people who came out when they realized what their loved ones were up against. And they've been the ones on Democracy Now! They've been the ones that have really become the voice. These are people that were starting from never having done this work before, but really being passionate and sensing the urgency of it. And so that's the reality in our situation. So we would be getting together every week and sharing this information.
As a coalition, yeah.
As a coalition.
But also,
go ahead. So I organize with a group that's like a majority white people who recognize that it's a really good thing for us to try to go and get other white people to be in on these conversations and shift things. And so one action that we noticed we noticed there was a huge presence of media coverage. And like the week before, we went to one that was organized by people of color, and it was not the same kind of thing at all. And we recognized that there's just like different influence and different, like, we have more of a voice. And that really like shifted our thinking in terms of like, how do we use that to counter that and to shift it? And so like from then on, we realized that we wanted to, anytime that like we tried to get that media attention, we would try to offer an alternative that is a voice of somebody of color. So that's really important with a lot of different levels of these things, especially when you're talking to people inside prison.
So maybe it's time for our closing remarks.
Yeah, so when we went through this workshop, we talked about just like the importance of unity in a coalition. And I've been in coalitions where it's like, okay, these are people that's fighting for one issue, even though it's all tied together. Education is tied into all of this stuff. The prison system is tied to all of the deportation stuff is tied to all this stuff. It's just a way to segregate our communities in different ways so that we won't stand up with each other to fight these issues. The thing is, unity is the key. We're building a lot of momentum around Trump being in office. Nobody likes him, I guess. I don't know, but it's just like there's a lot of people coming together because of that. But also, it's just a lot of people talking about prison reform. They know it don't work. It's common sense it don't work. It's been in statistics like leading up to this. Like we could clearly see it like 10 years ago that it wasn't working. And it's just like, but we as a community, I think that the system destroyed our community so much that we don't understand the power we have. We don't understand that if we come together, that we can change things. So my leaving message to y'all is, in a coalition, we all have to figure out ways that we can all, sometimes even drop what's on our agenda. Oh my God, I don't believe that. That's not my phone, is it? No, it's not you. But yeah, because I've seen at different coalitions, like we be working on one issue, but you gotta also understand these are different organizations that work on their own separate issues, and then we're coming together to the table to, join and try to stand up against whatever the injustice is. But that also takes us working on other people's issues for a moment if it's strategic. And it's just like with some organizations, I don't know, it's a lot of things that separate us if we allow it to. And we have to be the leaders, and we have to just come together and make a big change in our communities. It first starts with love. We can't do anything with hate. We can't do anything with punishment. It never works. Never will. All we do is we redo that to other people. We teach them to hate and punish. So we got to teach love, and we got to teach community. We got to rebuild our communities, you know, and that's the difference. Yeah, it is different at protests when it's colored people because our communities are destroyed completely. There's no leaders. Everybody's in jail. You got people that's poor. You got people that's working 3 jobs. They can't come out to an event. You know, I canvass these communities and I talk to people and they're like, yeah, I got to work there and then I got to go there. They can't even really get involved because they got to take care of their family. So we got to figure out ways that we can come together as a whole and just change society in general.
And on that note, thank you very much, everyone, for coming to our workshop.
There are pieces of literature back there, ways that you can get involved kind of immediately. There's also an investigate card if you're interested in the private prison companies that are promoting imprisonment in a big time. You can go on the AFSC website, AFSC/investigate, and find out if you yourself have any investments in these prison companies without even necessarily knowing it. So that's back there and so forth. But there's also some evaluation.
Yes, there's also an evaluation. If you love this workshop, you needed it, you can share that with us by grabbing one of those forms.
And even if you didn't like it so much.
Yeah, if you felt neutral about it, you can let us know about that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.